Hello everyone, and welcome back to Whisky Wednesday. Last week with the Arran we had a really good £60 whiskey, and this week with Arran we've got another really good £60 whiskey, or technically £59 is what I paid for it. Now you'll remember it was maybe not the tail end of last year, but maybe like late summer last year, we reviewed the Arran Quarter Cask. That's how much of it I have left, because it's a particularly good whiskey. And I scored this, I believe it was a 9. And I remember in the video saying it's not quite a 9.5 because I wanted to try batches side by side. Since that release, I've not seen a newer batch of it or tried a newer batch of it. So it still sits quite comfortably at 9. It was going to be involved with like the whiskies of the year, but Kilkerran and Wild Turkey just beat it in terms of value and like great flavour. But that was only £55. That's still a really good value whiskey. But as you can see by the colour contrast, today we're talking about the Arran Sherry Cask. I believe they call this the Bodega. I'm unsure of the batch, but it is bottled at 55.8%. It's a natural cask strength whiskey. It is 100% natural colour, and it is matured in, I think, 250 litre hogshead barrels. In fact, yes, it's sherry hogsheads, they say it on the front. Hogsheads are just slightly larger, rebuilt casks, bourbon cask, sherry casks. 250 litres, it's pretty standard, I suppose. I can't remember the size of like a standard American barrel, because this will probably be American oak. It doesn't smell funky enough to be European oak. But nonetheless, just to look at it is quite alluring to the eye. Now, I don't think I talked that much about the distillery when we covered Arran. They just released this bottle design, and now, as you can see on the top of this cork, the corks are different. The cork now has a little image of the island on it with the 3 birds. I forget what kind of birds they are, but they're indigenous to Arran. And then there's like longitude and latitude on the side of the cork, which is quite cool. So they've done a Talisker and put the longitude and latitude on the bottle. But in terms of the distillery, it is the Lacranza distillery, or the north part of the island. They're now distilling and indeed aging distillery in the whiskey in the south of the island at their new distillery at Lag, L-A-G-G, which is their peated style. So that's really exciting. They're going to have a distillery just for peated whiskey and a distillery for unpeated whiskey. Fabulous. Keep doing what you're doing. And since this redesign, as someone who works in retail, I've seen Arran just fly out of the shop. People are loving it. They're loving the design. They're loving the natural colour. They're loving the idea of the distillery. The brand ambassadors are fabulous. Just doing a really good job. And this is their 26th year this year. I've not tried their 25-year-old yet. I nearly bought a bottle of it last year, but I was just very cautious and pulled back a little bit. But anyway, the island itself is one of the best microclimates for aging whiskey in all of Scotland. It's always slightly hotter there due to the Gulf Stream coming up and getting into the island a bit more. They've got some beautiful natural water springs which provide amazing water content for producing whiskey. And naturally, as the colour you can see, some quite interesting, very active sherry casks. They don't state what they are. I'm assuming it's at least Oloroso. There might be a little bit of Pedro Jimenez in there, but just the way this thing holds the glass is quite incredible. But yeah, sub 60 quid, and you get all of this big sherry goodness for it. But enough of the rant. Let's smell, let's taste. It's a smell from sherry casks I've not had in a very long time, and it's so welcome. It is so jammy and fresh summer berry fruits compared to the usual kind of somewhat boring smelling notes of raisin and Christmas cake and chocolate when it comes to sherry casks. But yeah, this thing is like summertime in a glass, which is something I only normally reserve for bourbon barrel whiskies when we talk about pineapple and mango and coconut and caramel. But this is just loaded with like raspberry, strawberry, rhubarb, cherry. There's some beautiful kind of really soft like damson notes running through it. I tried a damson liqueur the other day and it blew my mind, and this is very much akin to that. Like fresh bramble fruits, blackberries, with this really quite delicate spice lingering in the background. Now at 9 years old, at just under 56% alcohol on paper, this thing should really be blowing my nose away with like really intense spice and over the top ethanol, but it's really not. It is very subtle. The alcohol does just sit in the background and it doesn't attack you in any way. But yeah, just super jammy. All those big, beautiful, bright summer and spring fruits kind of melded into one. Delicious, truly delicious nose, but the money's in the taste. So let's see what that says. Oh, that is much more powerful on the palate than it is on the nose. Wow, okay. As you can see from the bottle, when I bought this, because of the shape of the bottle, when we talk about neck pores and how the whiskey maybe hasn't had enough time to breathe, I would argue with that bottle shape that yeah, maybe it probably should have, maybe should have reviewed this after it's had a bit more time to air out. But wow, that is an experience in itself, even with only being this far down the bottle. The initial hit is just like tobacco leaf. I'm not a smoker. I don't smoke like socially or anything. I've tried cigarettes and I've tried cigars for like celebratory occasions. And this has the attack of like really dark, like Nicaraguan tobacco, like those really small, thin, dark cigars. The jamminess, it's still there, but it turns into like sour cherry, almost like Black Forest Gatto style cherry, like Kirsch liqueur. Even though it's a particularly dark colour, maybe the youth of the spirit is having like a bit more of an impact when it comes to taste. Like yeah, but the subtlety on the nose, and those beautiful summer fruits, it really is a tale of two whiskies, this thing. The finish is full of this beautiful, dry, high cocoa, dark chocolate. Yeah, if you've ever had 100% cocoa, which is only something I've ever had once, it almost turns into this like really dry, almost like cheese effect. Cocoa isn't sweet. You know, it takes milk and sugar to make it sweet. And it's really leaning into that. You're talking like 85, 90, maybe even 95% cocoa, or cacao, I should say. And then, yeah, that tobacco thing, it's just so prominent. I've mentioned in a few videos, specifically most recently, the Woodford straight wheated whiskey video. Didn't call it a wheated bourbon that time. My dad, he used to smoke Golden Virginia tobacco, which is quite a famous brand in the UK. It comes in like a little green packet and it's got like a picture of like a ploughman on the front of it. And I've never smoked that tobacco ever in my life, but the smell of it, and like the smell of him smoking it when he used to stand outside and like walk the dog, it's just there. And it is this very rich, earthy, without being smoky or herby or green, as I call it. It's deep and it's powerful. It really, really is. However, I still don't think it's as good as that. That blew my mind. And I really need to buy another one because that just isn't enough to live on anymore. And all the sediment in it is starting to take form. This was incredible. Incredible being a word. Not quite a 10, but incredible. This is very, 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 very good. If you like things like Glenfarclas 105, Aberlour Boona, Glenallachie Cask Strength, the 10-year-old, this is in that ballpark without being too expensive or being sold out, because it's still relatively available. I've got some on the shelf over there. This is really good, and it's a great example of sherry cask whiskey that isn't overly sweet and typical, and it does some other interesting things, but I don't think it's as good as the quarter cask. That might be my bias for bourbon barrels and cask strength bourbon stuff in general, but it's still a very, very, very well-made whiskey. So that got a 9. The Ardnamurchan last week got an 8.5. So what do we score this? Still got bags of flavour, still a beautiful colour, it's very alluring, there's some atypical flavours in it for something which is not peated, but sherry influenced. And it's sub 60 quid, just. I'm gonna score it the same. I'm gonna score it an 8.5. As this whiskey gets older, and by all means, if you go to the Arran website, they do state this is a 9-year-old product, as with the quarter cask. It still scores an 8.5. It's still fantastic, but it's just not quite as good as this. That could be a personal bias thing. All of this is subjective. But yeah, still a delicious whiskey, still worthy of your time. And if you are an Arran fan, which most of us are these days, this is still something I think you should pick up. And as it gets further down that as it gets further down that glass, this bottle, the other B word, it should be something which deserves people's attention. And indeed, it's picking up attention. But yeah, that's an 8.5 out of 10. It is a delicious whiskey. By all means, if you've got one, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. But thank you all for watching. I'm Phil. This is the Whisky Shop in Manchester. This is Whisky Wednesday. And I'll see you all next week. Cheers.